ought to be ashamed of yourself," said Alice. "A great girl like you," she might as well said this, "to go on crying in this way. Stop it this moment, I tell you." But she went on all the same, shedding gallons of tears until there was a large pool all around her, about 4 inches deep and reaching half down the hall. After a time, she heard the little pattering of feet in the distance. She hastily dried her eyes to see what was coming. It was the White Rabbit, returning splendidly dressed, with a pair of white kid gloves in one hand and a large fan in the other. He came trotting along in a great hurry, muttering to himself as he came, "Oh, the Duchess! The Duchess! Oh, won't she be savage if I kept her waiting?" Alice felt so desperate that she was ready to ask for anyone. So when the rabbit came near her, she began in a low, timid voice, "If you please, sir." The rabbit, startled violently, dropped the white kid gloves and the fan, and scurried away into the darkness as hard as he could. Alice took up the fan and gloves, and as the hall was very hot, she kept fanning herself all the time and went on talking. "Oh, dear, dear, how queer everything is today. And yesterday things went on just as usual. I wonder if I've been changed in the night. Let me think. Was I the same when I got up this morning? I almost think I can remember feeling a little different. But if I'm not the same, the next question is, who in the world am I? Oh, that's the great puzzle." And she began thinking over all the children she knew that were the same age as herself, to see if she could have been changed for any of them. "Now, I'm sure I'm not Ada," she said, "for her hair goes in such long ringlets, and mine doesn't go in ringlets at all. And I'm sure I can't be Mabel, for I know all sorts of things, and she knows such a very, very little. Besides, she's she, and I'm I. And, oh dear, how puzzling it all is. I'll try if I know all the things I used to know. Now, let me see. 4 times 5 is 12, and 4 times 6 is 13, and 4 times 7 is... Oh dear! I shall never get to 20 at that rate. However, the multiplication table doesn't signify. Let's try geography. London is the capital of Paris, and Paris is the capital of Rome, and Rome... Oh, that's all wrong, I'm certain. I must have changed for Mabel. I'll try and say, how doth the little... And she crossed her hands on her lap as if she were saying lessons, and began to repeat it. But her voice sounded hoarse and strange, and the words did not come the same as they used to. How doth the little crocodile improve his shining tail, and pour the waters of the Nile on every golden scale? How cheerful he seems to grin, how neatly spreads his claws, and welcomes little fishes in with gentle smiling jaws. Oh, I'm sure those are not the right words. Oh, said poor Alice, and her eyes started to fill with tears again as she went on. I must be Mabel after all, and I shall have to go and live in that poky little house and have next to no toys to play with. And ever so many lessons to learn. Oh, no, I've made up my mind about it. If I'm Mabel, I'll stay down here. It'll be no use them putting their heads down and saying, "Oh, come up again, dear." And I shall only look up and say, "Who am I then? Tell me that first. And then, if I like being that person, I'll come up. If not, I'll stay down here till I'm somebody else." But, oh dear, cried Alice with a sudden burst of tears, I do wish they would put their heads down. I am so very tired of being all alone here. As she said this, she looked down at her hands. She was surprised to see that she had put on one of the rabbit's little white kid gloves while she was talking. How can I have done that? She thought. I must be growing small again. She got up and went to the table to measure herself by it, and found that, as nearly as she could guess, she was now about 2 feet tall, and was going on shrinking rapidly, and soon found out that the cause of this was the fan she was holding, and she dropped it hastily, just in time to save herself from shrinking away altogether. Oh, that was a narrow escape, said Alice, a good deal frightened at the sudden change, but very glad to find herself still in existence. And now for the garden! And she ran with all speed back to the little door. But alas, the little door was shut again, and the little golden key was lying on the glass table as before. And things are worse than ever, thought the poor child, for I never was so small as this before, never, and I declare it's too bad that it is. As she said these words, her foot slipped, and in another moment, splash! She was up to her chin in salt water. Her first idea was that she had somehow fallen into the sea. And in that case, I can go back by the railway, she said to herself. Alice had been to the seaside once in her life, and had come to the general conclusion that whenever you go on to the English coast, you find a number of bathing machines in the sea, some children digging in the sand with wooden spades, then a row of lodging houses, and behind them a railway station. However, she soon made out that she was in the pool of tears which she had wept when she was 9 feet tall. I wish I hadn't cried so much, said Alice as she swam about, trying to find her way out. I shall be punished for it now, I suppose, by being drowned in my own tears. That will be a queer thing, to be sure. However, everything is queer today. Just then she heard something splashing about in the pool a little way off, and she swam nearer to find out what it was. At first she thought it was a walrus or a hippopotamus, But then she remembered how small she was now, and she soon made out that it was only a mouse that had slipped in like herself. Would it be of any use now, thought Alice, to speak to this mouse? Everything is so out of the way down here that I should think very likely it could talk. At any rate, there's no harm in trying. So she began. Oh, Mouse, do you know the way out of this pool? I am very tired of swimming about here, oh, Mouse. Alice thought this must be the right way of speaking to a mouse. She never done such a thing before, but she remembered having seen in her brother's Latin grammar a mouse, of a mouse, to a mouse, a mouse, o mouse. The mouse looked at her very inquisitively. It seemed to her to wink with one of its little eyes, but it said nothing. Perhaps it doesn't understand English, thought Alice. I dare say it's a French mouse come over with William the Conqueror. For with all her knowledge of history, Alice had no very clear notion how long ago anything had happened. So she began again. Qu'est-ce que c'est, mon chat? Which was the first sentence in her French lesson book. The mouse gave a sudden leap out of the water and seemed to quiver all over with fright. Oh, I beg your pardon, cried Alice hastily, afraid that she had hurt the poor animal's feelings. I quite forgot you didn't like cats.
Oh, not like cats,
cried the mouse in a shrill, passionate voice.
You, would you like cats if you were me?
Well, perhaps not, said Alice in a smoothing tone, but don't be angry about it. And yet I wish I could show you our cat Dinah. I think you'd take a fancy to cats if you could only see her. She is such a quiet thing, Alice went on, half to herself, as she swam lazily about in the pool. And she sits purring so nicely by the fire, licking her paws and washing her face. And she is such a nice soft thing to nurse. And she's such a capital one for catching mice. Oh, I beg your pardon, cried Alice again, as for this time the mouse was bristling all over, and she felt certain it might be really offended. We won't talk about her any more, if you rather not.
We indeed,
cried the mouse, who was trembling down to the end of its tail.
As if I would talk about such a subject. Oh, Fanny, I've always hated cats. Nasty, low, vulgar things. Don't let me hear that name again.
Oh, I won't indeed, said Alice, in a great hurry to change the subject of conversation. Are you fond of dogs? The mouse did not answer, so Alice went on eagerly. There is such a nice little dog near our house. I should like to show you. A little bright-eyed terrier, you know, with such long curly brown hair, and it'll fetch things when you throw them, and it'll sit up and beg for its dinner, and all sorts of things. I can't remember half of them. And it belongs to a farmer, you know, and he says it's so useful, it's worth £100. He says it kills like all the rats and... Oh, dear, cried Alice in a soulful tone. Oh, I'm afraid I've offended it again. For the mouse was swimming away from her as hard as it could, and making quite a commotion in the pool as it went. So she called softly after it. Mouse, dear, do come back again, and we won't talk about cats or dogs either, if you don't like them. When the mouse heard this, it turned round and swam slowly back to her, Its face was quite pale, with passion, Alice thought, and it said in a low, trembling voice,
Let us let us get to shore, and then I'll tell you my history, and you'll understand why it is I hate cats and dogs.
It was high time to go, for the pool was getting quite crowded with the birds and animals that had fallen into it. There was a duck, and a dodo, a lorry, and an eaglet, and several other curious creatures. Alice led the way, and the whole party swam to shore. Chapter 3. A Crocus Race and a Long Tail. There were indeed a queer-looking party that assembled on the bank. The birds were draggled feathers, the animals with fur clinging close to them, and all dripping wet, cross, and uncomfortable. The first question, of course, was how to get dry again. They had a consultation about this, and after a few minutes it seemed quite natural to Alice to find herself talking familiarity with them, as if she had known them all her life. Indeed, she had quite a long argument with the lorry, who had last turned sulkily and would only say, "I'm older than you, and you must know better." And this Alice would not allow without knowing how old it was, and as the lorry positively refused to tell its age, there was no more to be said. At last the mouse, who seemed to be the person of some authority among them, called out,
"Sit down, all of you, and listen to me. I'll soon make you dry enough."
They all sat down at once in a large ring, with the mouse in the middle. Alice kept her eyes anxiously fixed on it, for she felt sure she would catch a bad cold if she did not get dry very soon.
"Ahem,"
said the mouse with an important air.
"Are you all ready? This is the driest thing I know. Silence all around, if you please. William the Conqueror, whose cause was favoured by the Pope, was soon submitted to by the English, who wanted leaders, and have been of late much accustomed to usurpation and conquest. Edwin and Morcar, the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria."
Ugh, said the lorry with a shiver.
"I beg your pardon,"
said the mouse, frowning, but very politely.
"Did you speak?"
"Oh, not I," said the lorry hastily.
"I thought you did,"
said the mouse.
"I'll proceed. Edwin and Morcar, the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria, declared for him, and even Stigand and the patriotic Archbishop of Canterbury found it advisable."
Found what?"
said the duck.
"Found it,"
the mouse replied rather crossly.
"Of course you know what it means."
I know what it means well enough. When I find a thing,"
said the duck,
"it's generally a frog or a worm.
The question
is, what did the Archbishop find?"
The mouse did not notice the question, but hurriedly went on.
"He found it advisable to go with Edgar Athelin to meet William and offer him the crown. William's conduct at first was moderate, but the insolence of his Normans—" "How are you all getting on, my dear?"
he continued, turning to Alice as he spoke. "As wet as ever," said Alice in a melancholy tone. "It doesn't seem to dry me at all."
"In that case,"
said the Dodo solemnly, rising to his feet.
I move that the meeting adjourn for the immediate adoption of the more energetic remedies.
Speak English, said the eaglet. The eaglet. I don't know the meaning of half those long words. And what's more, I don't believe you do either, said the eaglet, bent down its head to hide a smile. Some of the other animals tittered audibly.
What I was going to say,
said the Dodo in an offended tone,
was that the best thing to get us dry would be a caucus race.
What is a caucus race? Said Alice. No, not that she much wanted to know, but the Dodo had paused as if it thought that somebody ought to speak, and no one else seemed to incline to say anything.
Why,
said the Dodo,
the best way to explain it is to do it.
And as you might like to try the thing yourself some winter day, I will tell you how the Dodo managed it. First, it marked out a racecourse in a sort of circle. The exact shape doesn't matter, it said. And then all the party were placed along the course, here and there. There was no 1, 2, 3 and away, but they began running like they liked, or when they liked, and left off when they liked. So it was not easy to know when the race was over. However, when they had been running half an hour or so, and were quite dry again, the Dodo suddenly called out,
The race is over!
And they all crowded around, panting and shaking.
But who has won?
This question the Dodo could not answer without a great deal of thought, and it stood for a long time with one finger pressed upon its forehead, the position in which you usually see Shakespeare in the pictures of him, while the rest waited in silence. At last the Dodo said,
Everyone has won, and all must have prizes.
But who is to give the prizes?
Quite a chorus of voices asked.
Why, she, of course,
said the Dodo, pointing to Alice with one finger, and the whole party at once crowded around her, calling out in a confused way,
Prizes!
prizes, prizes,
Prizes! Oh, prizes!
Alice had no idea what to do, and in desperation she had put her hand in her pocket and pulled out a box of comforts. Luckily the salt water had not got into them, and handed them round as prizes. There was exactly one apiece all around.
Oh, but she must have a prize herself, you know,
said the Mouse.
Of course,
said the Dodo. The Dodo replied very gravely.
What else have you got in your pocket?
It went on, turning to Alice. Only a thimble, said Alice sadly.
Hand it over, then,
said the Dodo. Then they all crowded round her once more, while the Dodo solemnly presented the thimble, saying,
We beg your acceptance of this elegant thimble.
And when it had finished his short speech, they all cheered. Alice thought the whole thing very absurd, but they all looked so grave that she did not dare to laugh, and as she could not think of anything to say, she simply bowed, and took the thimble, looking solemn at it as she could. The next thing was to eat the comforts. This caused some noise and confusion, as the large birds complained that they could not taste theirs, and the small ones choked and had to be patted on the back. However, it was all over at last, and they sat down again in a ring and begged the Mouse to tell them something more. You promised to tell me your history, you know, said Alice. And why is it you hate C and D? she added in a whisper, half afraid that it would be offended again.
Oh, mine is a long and sad tale,
said the mouse, turning to Alice and sighing. It is a long tale, certainly, said Alice, looking down with wonder at the mouse's tail. But why do you call it sad? And she kept on puzzling about it while the mouse was speaking, so that her idea of the tale was something like this.
If a fairy said to a mouse that he met in a house, let us both go to the law. I shall persecute you. Come and I'll take no denial. We must have the trial. For really this morning I've nothing to do, said the mouse to the car. Such a trial, dear sir, with no jury or judge, would be wasting our breath. I'll be judge, I'll be jury, said cunning old Fury, and I'll try the whole cause and condemn you to death. Are you not attending?
said the mouse to Alice severely.
What are you thinking of?
Oh, I beg your pardon, said Alice very humbly. You have got to the fifth bend, I think.
I have not,
cried the mouse sharply and very angrily. And not, said Alice, always wanting to make herself useful and looking anxiously about her. Oh, do let me help to undo it.
I shall do nothing of the sort,
said the mouse, getting up and walking away.
You insult me by talking such nonsense.
I didn't mean it, pleaded poor Alice, but you're so easily offended, you know. The mouse only growled in reply. Please come back and finish your story, Alice called after it, and the others all joined in chorus.
Oh, yes, please do.
But the mouse only shook its head impatiently and walked a little quicker.
Oh, it's what a pity he wouldn't stay,
sighed the lorry as soon as it was out of sight, and an old crab took the opportunity of saying to her daughter, Oh, my dear, now let this be a lesson to you never to lose your temper.
Oh, hold your tongue, Ma,
said the young crab a little snappishly.
You're enough to try the patience of an oyster.
Oh, I wish I had Dinah here. I know I do, said Alice aloud, addressing nobody in particular. She'd fetch him back.
Then, who is this Dinah, if I might venture to ask the question?
said the lorry. Alice replied eagerly, for she was always ready to talk about her pet. Oh, Dinah's our cat, and she's such a capital one for catching mice. You can't think, and oh, I wish you could see her after the birds. Why, she'll eat a little bird as soon as look at it. This speech caused remarkable sensation among the party. Some of the birds hurried off at once. Some old magpie began wrapping itself up carefully, remarking,
I must be getting home. The night air doesn't suit my throat.
And a canary called out in a trembling voice to its children, Come away, my dears. It's time for you to go to bed. On various pretenses, they all moved off, as Alice was soon left alone. Oh, I wish I hadn't mentioned Dinah, she said to herself in a melancholy tone. Nobody seems to like her down here, and I'm sure she's the best cat in the world. Oh, my dear Dinah, I wonder if I shall ever see you any more. And here poor Alice began to cry again, as she felt very, very lonely and low-spirited. In a little while, however, she heard again the little pattering of footsteps in the distance, and she looked up eagerly, half hoping that the mouse had changed its mind and was coming back to finish his story.